Good morning, CSL Delaware. Good morning, Woodmill. Goodbye, Woodmill. Seeing with 2020 Spiritual Vision is the CSL theme for the year, and January's focus is Getting Grounded. Today's topic, What the Mystics Have Taught. Ernest Holmes in the Science of Mind text writes, a mystic is not a mysterious person, but is one who has a deep inner sense of life and of his unity with the whole. A mystic is one who intuitively perceives truth. The mystic senses the atmosphere of God. The mystic sense reveals the greater truth and knows that even as infinite as the divine being is, it is still personal to all who believe in its presence. Wayne Tisdale wrote in The Mystic Heart, mysticism is an attempt to possess the inner reality of spiritual life, or direct access to the divine. Spirituality, which derives from mysticism, serves as our greatest single resource for changing our centuries-old trajectory of violence and division. Look up to the screen and speak this truth with me. I am a unique expression of spirit, stepping into life in ever more amazing ways by living in alignment with spiritual principles, choosing thoughts, words, and actions that enable me to live an empowered and positive life. And so it is.
So it is. Thank you, Marcy. Mysticism. This is a mystical path that we're walking. Does everybody know that? We get that? This is a mystical path that we walk here at the spiritual community. And so, what is it that this mysticism is all about? And where I want to start, though, I want to start first with what separates us from that consciousness. So the consciousness, of course, of the mystic is oneness consciousness, which we talk about a lot here. And a realizing that we have the very source of all that is in the center and core of our being, every one of us individualized expressions of the divine. And yet, what is it that separates us? And it's, many of you, I'm sure, have heard the term the veil of separation. Well, what is the veil of separation? What is it that attributes or that causes this kind of perspective that throws us off our path? And what it is, it's what we identify with. If we identify with the mind chatter, that stuff going on in the mind, that's the veil of separation in action. If we identify with tumultuous emotions that we're caught up in the moment, that's the veil of separation. If we are caught up in conditions that we see in our life or in our world, and we're really stuck there, that's the veil of separation. If we are caught up in things going on with our physical bodies that we don't like, and maybe in some of the things we do like, if we're caught up in that and we think that's our identity, that's the veil of separation. So how do we break that process? And that's what today is all about. Break that stuckness. That's what this path is all about, the mystical path, the mystical perspective. It's about piercing that veil, getting to the other side, and it's an inward journey, getting to the other side and discovering who we are and whose we are is another way to look at it. Who we are and whose we are. That we are expressions of this great ultimate reality that encompasses everything and everyone, and yet is more than that. because it's a field of infinite potentiality and possibility. So let's breathe into that. Let it sink in. And realize that this journey that we're on then, and look at how many of us are here, and there are so many more all over the planet who are on this journey of oneness, of realizing our interconnectedness, our interdependency, and realizing that we are grounded and rooted in these qualities of the divine. That's our core, and that's our essence. That's our truth, and that's our reality. Here's another aspect of the veil of separation that I think is so, so important. You know how much all of us appreciate our intuition and our inner guidance and the inspiration that we receive and the beautiful new ideas that pop into our minds that feed us. And those feelings of love and peace and joy, all of that goodness that we feel. Let us be aware that those are the things that we cut ourselves off from with this thing called the veil of separation. So again, it's a shift of identity that we're talking about. It's no longer identifying with the mind chatter, the emotions, the physical body, and the world of conditions, but instead realizing our true identity is what? Spirit. The essence of who we are, which is unlimited being, which lives beyond, was here before the body and lives beyond the time of the body, when the body is no longer serving us and it's time to move on. That is the mystical perspective, and that is what truly is going to set us free. So here's the challenge. For many of us, we've been hanging out in this tyranny of the mind and the body and the conditions and the emotions for so long that we must be conscious, continually conscious, to break the pattern. And so that's the challenge, and that's why we're here, and that's why community is so important, because we can remind each other when we're getting caught up in that false identity and help us to shift back into who we are in truth. Co-creators, actually we are participators in creation. And when we wake up to that and we choose our thoughts more consciously, and we put our focus on the good, the true, and the beautiful, and we allow ourselves to be inspired by divine vision, then we are participating in this thing that we call co-creating heaven on earth, a world that works for everyone. That's the high vision that we hold here. Heaven on earth, a world that works for everyone. I love again the what is a mystic, Ernest Holmes, which Marcy just read. A mystic is not a mysterious person, but one who has a deep inner sense of life, and their unity with the whole. Ernest Holmes goes on to write this beautiful poem in this thing called You, which is one of his books. He says, "There is that within me which knows. I am not only one with the one power. This power is actually flowing through me now. I am not only unified with the divine presence around me, this presence is my presence. It is the presence of my real self and my true self. I am forever one with life. I am that I am." Let's talk a little bit about the difference between psychism and mysticism, because sometimes that gets confused. Psychics read race consciousness. In the science of mind symbol, which is right here, this is just a representation of the creative process and the all that is, both on a universal level and on an individual level. And this is actually three aspects of being. And the top aspect is, for us, as conscious mind, the spirit essence of who we are. And so it's the universal mind of God on the universal level. So this is where new ideas flow from. So these new ideas, and that's what the V is, these new ideas, inspirations, fall into something called, or acted upon by something called universal mind or creative medium. And that contains all of the thoughts and all of the thoughts and experiences of humanity since the time began. So Ernest Holmes called that race consciousness, or human race consciousness would be another way, meaning collective consciousness of all of us, contains all of those memories and thoughts of humanity. But it also contains the unformed substance. So thoughts then falling into law that automatically act upon our new thoughts becomes our life experience. So the psychic reads this realm right here: human thought, human feelings, all those memories, and so on. The mystics hang out up here at the top. And so the mystics have that, and this doesn't matter what culture, what religious background, or spiritual tradition, mystics sense the unity of all life, and they live in that experience of oneness and wholeness, that we are all of the same source. So that's the difference between psychism and mysticism. Mystics, can gather information from that field, and actually, psychics can gather information from that field, and actually that's what we often do. We often pick up information about each other. We have those natural capacities, but it is important to realize that this is a different thing. Mysticism is a different thing. It's when we see from that place of ultimate reality. So I am that I am. Ernest Holmes mentioned that. I am that I am. Where did that phrase come from? Well, it comes from a teaching story that many of you will I'm sure recognize, and it's the story of Moses when he was in the desert. He had left Egypt, and because he would have been killed by the Pharaoh was out after him. He left and he joined this family, Jethro's family, and he was tending the flock in the desert by himself, and all of a sudden this bush burst into flame. And in the flame was the voice of God. And the voice of God gave him some real clear direction, said, all the children of Israel are afflicted and they're suffering, and Moses, I want you to go and get them out of Egypt and take them to the promised land, the land of milk and honey. And of course, Moses was like, no way am I going back there. If I go back there, I could be killed by the Pharaoh. There's no way. And so he gave a whole laundry list of reasons why he could not go back to Egypt, to this voice of God. And God, of course, countered every single one. And the one that's key that relates to what I'm talking about is where he said he finally was convinced that maybe he should go, except for one thing. He said, the children of Israel won't believe me when I say God has sent me. They will ask, what is God's name? To which God replied, tell them, I am that I am has sent me. So again, these teaching stories are talking about something very deep. There's a historical thing to them, but the people of that time and age and those cultures spoke in metaphors, and they took stories and they embellished them to make a point spiritually. So the point of this, bless you. Thank you for punctuating it for me. The point of this is the flame, the inner flame, that that flame of the bush represents the inner flame that is within each and every one of us, and the am that I am that I am presence within us. Well, make sure I'm good. Okay, so the mother of New Thought, Emma Curtis Hopkins. How many have heard of Emma Curtis Hopkins? Yeah, if you've been around for a while, you've heard of her. She was a really well-respected mystic, and she taught something like 50,000 different students back in her time. This was back in the early 1900s. And among her students were people like Ernest Holmes and the Fillmores and other great beings who went on to start New Thought traditions. And so Ernest Holmes, of course, was one of her students. And she, again, was known as a mystic, a really deep, powerful mystic. And she spoke often of the radiant I am self. And if you look online and you do just put in radiant I am, you will be in awe of the beautiful words that are with a particular prayer that's called the radiant I am. It's beautiful. Emma believed that the name I am, she says, addressed to the highest, and meaning with the highest consciousness, awakens the spirit of authority, majesty, undefeatable courage. It awakens the sincerity, boldness, and intelligence of leadership, and that originality of action and language of the great heroes of all ages. The radiant I am prayer is powerful, and this is the essence of it, the idea behind it. So there was a story about a truth seeker who had heard about a council of mystics, and he wanted to sit at the feet of the masters and learn and to develop this kind of thing called mystic consciousness as well. So what he did is he sold everything. He sold all of his possessions and he set out on the journey. And he knew that this journey would take years because the place that he had to go to on foot was at the very top of a mountain. I'm imagining something like Mount Everest or something, someplace really, really high. And so as he set off on this journey, he encountered every kind of obstacle imaginable. He experienced many losses over that period of time, a lot of physical pain, and little by little he began to gather other seekers with him. And so there was this band of seekers now that were all together and in search of this council of mystics that he had heard about. And so after years of struggle and a lot of effort and a lot of perseverance, they finally arrived. They finally arrived at this precipice where the Council of Mystics were, and they walked in the room, and there they were. They saw them, and they were like jumping for joy. They were so excited. They were finally there, and they'd finally get to sit at the feet of the masters. So they walked up, and they could see these people sitting there with hooded robes, and they got closer. And much to their horror, as they looked inside the robes, there was no one there. And they were destitute. And then they got quiet for a moment, and they all started looking at each other. And then they all began to get it. Oh, we're supposed to put on the robes of the mystic. And they realized that they were the ones that they had been seeking. They were the ones that they'd been looking for. So this is the path of the mystic. Yes, there may be teachers along the way, but ultimately there's the realization that that mystical consciousness that we're seeking is already within us. It's something that we need to cultivate. And the journey, in this story, the journey was an external journey. It's really an inward journey. It's an inward journey of prayer, meditation, visioning, journaling, yoga, whatever your practice is that helps you to line up with that inner presence. So we become a mystic then by thinking, speaking, writing, living as if we are the radiant I am self. And so it requires a kind of fasting, an inner fasting and feasting. So I like to use both of those. There's a fasting and a feasting. So it's fasting from judgment of yourself and others and feasting on the great I am that's dwelling within us and within others. It's fasting from apparent darkness and feasting on the reality of light. Fasting from pessimism and feasting on
optimism.
Yeah. Fasting from thoughts of illness and feasting on the wholeness that is God, that is who we are. It's fasting from words that pollute and feasting on words that purify. Fasting from anger, feasting on understanding. Fasting from worry, feasting on divine providence. Fasting from complaining, feasting on appreciation. Fasting from bitterness, feasting on forgiveness. Fasting from anxiety, feasting on truth and faith. Fasting from the ego, which means all belief in separation, and feasting on love. Feasting on love. So Joan Borshenko in The Ways of the Mystic writes, a mystic sees beyond the illusion of separation into the intricate web of life in which all things are expressions of the single whole. You can call this web God, the Tao, the Great Spirit, the Infinite Mystery, Mother, Father, whatever you choose. But the essence of this presence is love. Love. That's something that all of the mystics all over the world agree upon. They may give this presence different names, but the idea that the essence is love is universal. So love then is our I am presence. That's the energy of it. And so we can bring that love into all of our relationships, our most challenging relationships. And so when someone is acting in a way that's other than love, I love A Course in Miracles concept of this, that in all interactions, there's either one or two things. There's either love that's going on or a call for love. And when we can remember that and we can stay centered in our own love, then we realize that that other person, however they're behaving in the moment, in truth, they're calling for love. Because if they were aware that they were the presence of love, they would be acting that way, right? Because that's our truth and that's our reality. A practice that I have given myself is to say internally to myself when someone is reacting in a way that seems other than love, is to remind myself it's a call for love, and then to say to myself, you can't fool me, I know who you are in truth. You can't fool me. I know who you are in truth. So everyone, no matter who they are, is the radiant I am. And sometimes we're in disguise. That's all. So in the words of New Thought giant Emmett Fox, he said, there is no difficulty that enough love will not conquer. There is no disease that enough love will not heal. No door that enough love will not open. No gulf that enough love will not bridge. No wall that enough love will not throw down. No sin that enough love will not redeem. It makes no difference how deeply seated may be the trouble, how hopeless the outlook, how muddled the tangle, how great the mistake. A sufficient realization of love will dissolve it all. If you could only love enough, you would be the happiest and most powerful being in the world. A power of love, a power for good. So, as we open our eyes to who we are in truth, not the body, not the mind, not the conditions, not the emotions, but the spirit essence, the presence of love, the one who knows that we are one with all that is. We are the mystic. We are the mystic. And when we become that, I know that that is the answer that we are seeking in the world. It is the mystic consciousness, that awareness of oneness and love, that is going to transform any social injustice, any environmental issue, any war or conflict or violence or anything else that might seem to be going on, and not seem, that is going on in the world. It's the consciousness that we cultivate that is going to make the difference. So I am so grateful to be walking this path with all of you, this path of love, this path of the mystic. And to this I say, yes, and so it is. Woohoo!